We do get to be on the play, and I'm going to keep this hand. We have multiple of our one-of enchantments, plus some discard spells to break up our opponent's draw. So this is kind of what we're looking for. We're just missing a way to pressure our opponent. So something like a Lingering Souls, a Geist would be nice. It looks like we're up against Ad Nauseam here. So this is interesting. A double Simian Spirit Guide. Island Seachrome Coast. Then there's also an Angel's Grace and an Unlife. So what our opponent's really missing is the Ad Nauseam. I'm going to take away the Sleight of Hand, because I think that's the card that our opponent is going to be relying on the most to set up their hand, and rather play against the cards we know about than cards that our opponent can potentially draw into. So we have a Thoughtseize. I'm not going to even use the Thoughtseize here. Fatal Push was not a good pickup for this matchup. Now we know that some of the cards in our hand are just not going to be useful here. The Fatal Push and the Ghostly Prison, so we have to be aware of that moving forward. So there's Azure. Really no reason to play out the Ghostly Prison. So yeah, I'm just going to pass the turn here. And there's the Phyrexian Unlife. So we drew Jace. I think now we do want to Thoughtseize. We're going to get a better look at what our opponent's got. We see that Ad Nauseam did get picked up. So we're definitely going to force our opponent to discard that one. Then we can use this Jace to start looting away some of the bad cards in our hand. So the Jace was a really nice draw as well. And now we just have to avoid the Ad Nauseam. We have to avoid our opponent drawing into that card. So I'm just going to play Zur here. We can get Spreading Seas with Zur to start trying to... And it looks like our opponent played out the Phyrexian Unlife, so that's actually nice because we can just Attention Sphere both of those if we want to. So I'm going to flip Jace right now, I think. Well, yeah, I'm going to flip Jace right now. And really no need for the Fatal Push. So we've got Jace. We can flash something back like a Thoughtseize. I do like doing that, actually. We know about the contents of our opponent's hand. But first, let's see what we draw off the Spreading Seas, actually. I think we want to go ahead and find Spreading Seas here. Another option, though, would be to just go immediately for Steal the Godhead, and then we can... which is more damage. So we're not going to get comboed immediately because we can go Detention Sphere, the Unlifes, and then get rid of the Angel's Grace as well. So thinking about it some more, I think I like just getting the pressure. So now we've got a 3/6 flyer. I'm going to flash back this Inquisition of Kozilek here. And now that Angel's Grace is gone, we can play the Detention Sphere, get rid of both unlifes, and that's actually just going to be the game because we were able to shut off both angles of our attack that our opponent had access to, which was the protection in terms of playing Ad Nauseam and not dying, which was both the Angel's Graves and the Unlife, and then even if our opponent had drawn into Ad Nauseam there, it probably would not have been enough. And after Sideboard now, we can just go ahead and take out the removal. So definitely the 4 Fatal Pushes, and then the Pass and the Ghostly Prison come out. Stony Silence is pretty good. It stops cards like Lotus Bloom and Pentad Prism. We also want Negate. Leyline of Sanctity is an interesting one because the way that our opponent often wins is to discard lands and fireball us, essentially, which Leyline stops that from being able to happen. Now, oftentimes, though, the Ad Nauseam deck does have alternative win conditions, so that's something to be aware of. The Ancestrals are pretty good. I think we do want the Ancestrals. Explosives also is pretty good. So the question becomes, do we want Leyline of Sanctities? And, well, I don't think we need them. I think we can probably do want one. At least, so that we can find it with Zur. So, sure. I'm going to board 1 in for Lingering Souls. Try this. So that's something I'll have to think about, is whether we actually want this Leyline, and it turns out it's in our opener. So I guess we'll find out. It could be that we play it and our opponent's like, oh, that's it. But unfortunately, it looks like the game's still going on. So our opponent does have another way to win. So the Leyline is not going to be enough, most likely. Now, if we are able to take away all of our opponent's win conditions, that is a possibility still. Because sometimes the Ad Nauseam deck boards into cards like Laboratory Maniac, cards like Grave Titan, so creatures are also a route to win the game as well. Now the card I am referring to out of Cold Snap, you can basically, after drawing your whole deck, you discard lands, deal 3, and just continually do that over and over until we die, and so the Leyline does protect against that line. So we drew the Spreading Seas, and I am going to go ahead and cast it this turn, I think. Not too much else that we can conceivably play here. Besides potentially just Snapcaster Mage by itself, but that doesn't seem that great. Now the Inquisition isn't going to do anything because of the Leyline of Sanctity, which is unfortunate. Leyline is quite good against us. But the Geist of St. Traff, it presents a legitimate clock. that our opponent has to respect. And I think it's getting to the point where we actually do want to just play out these Snapcaster Mages and try to get this game over with as soon as possible. So, yep, I'm going to play multiple Snapcasters. We can attack here with the Creeping Tar Pit. Sure, let's go ahead and do that. That's going to bring our opponent all the way down to 1. So it's going to come down to this turn. We'll see if our opponent has a way of comboing off here. There's the Angel's Grace. And the Ad Nauseam. So exactly what our opponent needed, seemingly. And now we will witness how our opponent is able to win the game. So our opponent's now drawing their whole deck. The fact that they're at a negative life total does not matter. So we'll see if the Lightning Storm. So here's a Pentad Prism. That's gonna be able to produce 2 mana of any color. And here's the Laboratory Maniac. Yep, so that's the alternative win condition. You would draw a card while you have no cards in deck. So now our opponent's able to play the Serum Visions, and that is going to be a way to win. Okay. So we saw that our opponent has the potential to win through a Leyline with that Laboratory Maniac. And that was pretty unfortunate there. So in terms of sideboarding for game 3, the ley lines, because our opponent has the Laboratory Maniac, probably don't want them, but they still are good. Like if we're able to, say, Thoughtseize away or Inquisition away that Laboratory Maniac, that's huge. But I think still, yeah, I think we still want the 1 ley line. So I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to play the same configuration here. And so we actually drew the ley line again. So I'm going to keep this. This is, how often do you have one of, and it's a ley line, and you draw it both games? Pretty incredible. So to be honest, I'm not super familiar with this matchup and how this card plays out. Last game, it was, it ended up not being relevant. Hopefully this game, where maybe we're able to take our opponent's Laboratory Maniac with a discard spell, and having to combo off with Laboratory Maniac, it's still not easy. So happy to have the ley line. Now, interestingly, our opponent actually drew the Lightning Storm, which is not going to do much here, but we're just going to take the Pentad Prism. And the reason why it's not going to do much is we have the the Leyline of Sanctity. And we saw the ad nauseam, so we have negate for that potentially, which is good. Now, taking the Pentap Prism, we do have Stony Silence in hand, but we may not even want to play it because we have the Engineered Explosive. So we're still looking for a bit of pressure. Opponent's going to get a Scry. And so, yeah, not a whole lot going on. Now, one play that I missed in the last game was just the ability to play out the Engineered Explosives on 3, and so it can potentially answer that Laboratory Maniac. So we can potentially have explosives as another way to stop the ad nauseam combo, because now the Lightning Storm, that's taken away, so we don't have to worry about that line anymore. So explosives on 3 could be pretty relevant. So we're not going to play the Stony Silence, just going to play a more prolonged and drawn out game. So there's Jace. I'm going to go ahead and run that out. And in fact, if we do loot, discarding the Stony Silence is perfectly reasonable here. So here's a Leyline of Sanctity. We have the option of negating this. So it's kind of an interesting question of if we want to or not. And I don't think we really care enough to negate it. There's a Detention Sphere. Now, we have to remember, so Detention Sphere would hit our own Leyline if we decided to Detention Sphere our opponent's Leyline, so not something we're super interested in doing. Still going to keep it around. Discard Stony Silence here. And good old Creeping Tar Pit can start mounting some pressure. So that's going to bring our opponent down to 17, so still a ways to go. And it looks like this is going to be a Spoils of the Vault. So I'm going to go ahead and let this resolve. We'll see what this names. Maybe our opponent boarded in a creature of some sort. Now, if that's the case, so, okay. So it looks like our opponent was going for Angel's Grace here. So we see that getting revealed. So our opponent has that Angel's Grace, but it's unclear that they're actually going to be able to combo us at all. So this Thoughtseize, because of the Leyline, it's not very useful, unfortunately. So I'm going to loot with Jace. And I think we can just discard the Thoughtseize at this stage. So I'm going to do that. And we see that this Creeping Tar Pit can can become a win condition. It's slow and steady. We've got the explosives. So our opponent's going for Angel's Grace. I'm going to go ahead and let that resolve. Now, if our opponent does go for Ad Nauseam, we have this engineered explosives still. We don't want to get Pact of Negation and then not have our explosives be live, so I'm going to go ahead and let this resolve as well. This is going to let our opponent draw their whole deck. So we could have negated the Ad Nauseam. Then our opponent could then play a Pact of Negation. But the whole game plan revolves around engineered explosives being able to shut off Laboratory Maniac, and then the ley line stops the lightning storm. So we shouldn't actually need the negate to win here, which is the interesting part. So our opponent can now play Laboratory Maniac and try to draw a card, but in response to that, we can sacrifice the explosive. So definitely learn something about this matchup in terms of how it works and how to shut it off. Hopefully this works. So we see everything that our opponent has found here. So do we see something like an Echoing Truth? It looks like our opponent actually did find an Echoing Truth. Okay, so now the question becomes, do we negate this? And just looking through the cards that our opponent has revealed, not immediately seeing a Pact of Negation. So we see the Echoing Truth clearly, but we can go ahead and negate the Echoing Truth now. And we have to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that's going to be the match.